You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right.
Thanks for joining us once again on Locked On Texas Tech with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan, and we appreciate you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And thanks again to those who are subscribing on YouTube, and keep it coming anywhere you get your podcasts, as well as we are headed now on the downhill slope, the other side of Hump Day, Chris, as we begin to look ahead to North Carolina State in earnest, and a matchup that's only been played, 4 or 5 times, I think, prior to this one, not since the early 2000s when Mike Leach had a series over a couple of years with the Wolfpack. Some pretty entertaining games there, and curious to see if we're going to be in for maybe another tightly contested one and entertaining one Saturday night.
Well, as a double-digit underdog, you would certainly hope that it's a tightly contested game. But it's just fascinating that these non-conference series, because you've got Oregon and Oregon State and a bunch on your schedule in the years to come. But these, I think this one was done back in 2016 is when it was agreed to and signed, and it's go to Raleigh in 22. They come to Lubbock in 2027. But it's just fascinating how different this game looks now than it looked back in 16 when you agreed to it. And certainly, the return trip will be over 10 years from when that contract was originally signed and agreed to on the home and home. But Dave Doran, he's been there. He was there at the time on staff in Raleigh. So he's been there for, I guess this is 9th or 10th year for him. So which is a long time for a college coach to be anywhere in the Power 5 in one spot. So he was on the job whenever this thing was agreed to and signed, but it should be fun.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I'm kind of struck a little bit by some similarities in the programs, not just in color scheme, but I think a similarly sized stadium there in Raleigh to what you've got here in Lubbock. Similar number of bowl appearances all time, conference championships. I think your wins are off by about 30 or so all time. There's kind of some odd similarities between the two programs, but it seems like more often than not, I guess, for whatever differences there are between the two conferences, Chris, some of the approaches to football on both sides of the ball, I don't think are that far off. You can find wilder comparisons between the Big Ten and the Big 12 or something along those lines. How do you see the football over the years kind of breaking down between the ACC and the Big 12 conference?
You talking about style of play? Yeah, I think because Dave Doran was asked about this week on, hey, what do you think about playing like this kind of non-conference matchup? And he kind of answered it like, usually we play regional teams from a recruiting standpoint, but he said it's good to play a spread team and teams that, similar to what we see. And he mentioned Florida State and Clemson and some teams like that when comparing to Texas Tech. I'm like, I'd love to be in the same sentence as Clemson. That's for darn sure. And I don't know if you're running the same style of offense they are, but I think he was trying to talk about the caliber of athlete or whatever. But it's funny because I don't know if I spend a lot of time. The ACC and the Pac-12 are just a couple of those leagues that I don't, other than Clemson, I don't know if I spend a lot of time watching a lot of big time, ACC football. It's not like appointment television for me. And unless USC's or there's some Oregon maybe in the Pac-12, I'm not going to stop what I'm doing and paying attention. So I don't know what Duke looks like. I don't know what Wake Forest looks like. I don't know what, and in most cases, I would know what Florida State looks like. And I certainly watched them, in the opening weekend and their win over LSU. But Florida State's been down. But I think to your point, Casey, these are two leagues that are very similar. They're fairly competitive, fairly deep. I don't know if the Big 12 – I guess Oklahoma would be that team until they depart, but I don't know if you've had one team like Clemson that's just dominated the league over the last decade. It would clearly be Oklahoma in the Big 12. But I don't know if the ACC is as deep as the Big 12 is, but I think the style of football is probably somewhat similar. I think the Big 12 has gotten a lot better on defense over the last several years as we've seen this play out in front of us. And, I went to look just to see kind of what they'd had in the NFL draft over the last couple of years at NC State. I mean, their left tackle was the 6th pick in the draft, but they had no other players drafted from last year's team, which is probably a bad thing because they're so old that they're all back this year. So it would have been nice if some guys would have declared. But I don't know if I answered your question right, but those are, I guess, my thoughts.
No, I think generally that's a lot of what I'm feeling, and I'm curious if some of what North Carolina State has seen defensively elsewhere in the conference could help prepare them for some of what Texas Tech is going to bring offensively. And alternatively, I do wonder when you're talking about some of what you're going to see from the Wolfpack offense, if some of what exists in the Big 12 might help to benefit Red Raider defenders, at least, because you got a new coaching staff for the first time around. So you can't really act like, there are a whole lot of tendencies from league play with those guys, but certainly the guys that have been on the field, maybe the speed of the game. I don't know. You go to Wisconsin, and it's a bad week to use that as an example, but it's the first thing that comes to my mind. Are you surprised by the physicality? If you go somewhere here or there, are you surprised by the speed? Well, hopefully between these two, for Texas Tech's sake, there won't be any kind of surprises as far as those types of things are concerned. And, really, when you talk about some of what you're going to see in the backfield coming up offensively for North Carolina State, it's a little bit the exception to what at least I think I'm accustomed to seeing with an opposing quarterback, because it is a guy that wants to sling it, and maybe not a guy that wants to make so much happen on the move or kind of improvisationally whenever things break down in the pocket. I don't know necessarily how you coach, replace, teach, anything along the lines of those sorts experience. And this guy has got it in bunches. We're talking about Devin Leary, and here is Texas Tech defensive coordinator Tim DeRuyter talking about Mr. DeLeary.
He's an athletic quarterback, a live arm. They do a nice job with personnel grouping, spreading you out, bringing tight formations. It's kind of in vogue now with a lot of teams. He's a guy that extends the play, just kind of what we just saw, because he's athletic and can run. So you got to have plans for all those kind of things. And the fact that he's played a lot of ball, I think veteran quarterbacks who are talented like he is are probably the most difficult, task for defensive staffs to have to plan against. You get a young guy, you can kind of confuse him. He's seen a lot of things. So we're just going to have to really play well fundamentally and hopefully, keep him in check.
Yeah, he doesn't. This is much like their football team. They just don't beat themselves. This is kind of Dave Doran's MO, if you will. It's kind of bland, if you want to look at it that way, but it wins and it works. They're not like super flashy really with anything they do on either side of the ball, but yet it's very methodical and they're just very sound everywhere. And the quarterback in Devin Leary, he's a prime example of this. I think he just makes plays. He doesn't throw it to you very much at all.
No.
Like the 5 TDs and the 1 interception last year, and I'll let you speak to last year's stats, Casey. But
yeah, 35-5 is the TD to pick ratio, and this is just regular season action because they didn't play a bowl game.
Yeah, UCLA kind of squirmed their way out of that bowl game in San Diego.
Yeah.
But he's, Larry, if you go look at like some mock draft conversations for next year, you'll see Kentucky's guy, you'll see Florida's guy, you'll certainly see Alabama's guy as far as potential first-round picks or bona fide first-round picks, however we want to phrase that. And Devin Leary's name is right there. I think, BYU's guy. But Leary is thought to be an NFL guy, or certainly going to get that opportunity. I don't know whether it's first rounder or second rounder or fifth rounder, but at some point, because he doesn't throw it to you and because he just wins and he's got a strong arm and he's athletic. He's just 6'1", so he doesn't check all, like he's not the super,
right,
measurables type guy. It's 6'1", about 210 or so. But he's, somebody's going to take a chance on him fairly high in the draft. I don't know exactly what that looks like depending on how this year goes. But, yeah, he's just a problem, and he won't beat himself. And that's what kind of makes you nervous, especially about playing him in front of a home crowd at nighttime on national TV.
Man, no kidding. The guy that, doesn't have all the talent or maybe all the measurables on paper, but doesn't beat himself or his team or put his team in a bad position, is still a very, very valuable individual. And I just think, I don't know why I'm thinking of a Kansas State quarterback right now, but that's what I'm thinking about. I mean, it's like smart football teams wind up with sometimes talented guys that also don't beat themselves. But if you're going to have a guy that, again, is maybe not checking every box as far as, athletic gifts or physical gifts, a guy that's not going to get in his own way, and 35-5 TDs to giveaways, good grief, that's not getting in your own way, is what you're asking for. And so you're really going to have to work to earn some of those big plays defensively, as far as forcing him into some mistakes. One great way to do that would be to put some pressure on the guy and get into that backfield. I want to talk about coming up in just a moment what we've seen so far from Coach DeRuyter's rush defense as well, because obviously taking a rushing game out of the equation is a great way to get some pressure on a quarterback. And Chris, I don't know about you, I'm curious to your vantage, but I feel like we've seen Texas Tech, whenever they've designed some things to get in the backfield and maybe force the issue with the quarterback, I think there's been some success. You've collected some numbers sack-wise, but you've also had some things that didn't quite result in sacks that are disruptive. So I've been fairly pleased with that early on. It's a teeny sample. You've got one game basically as far as anything comparable to the opponents you'll see coming up, but I've been pleased with that aspect of Tech's defense so far.
Yeah, and NC State's offensive line, other than that draft pick, their left tackle last year that was number 6 overall pick, I think, to the Carolina Panthers, all 4 of those other starters are back. They're going to be really just solid up front. Shocker, we'll say that word a lot, but you got to win some of these matchups. And I don't know whether you mix it or whether you really heavy pressure or play a lot of coverage. I just don't, because they've got 2 running backs that I think they're pretty good, and then obviously Leary that can hurt you with his legs, very similar to what you'll do, and that your quarterback can do the same. And you've got 2 more than capable running backs and Taj and Saradrick. So that'll be interesting. But bottom line is you got to win up front or win some of that. If you can't. Might be a long night, or you're going to have a hard time stopping them if you just can't win some of those matchups up front. Very similar to what we talked about last week versus Houston, Casey. And that was kind of one of those matchups where you looked at your offensive line versus their defensive line. I will say I wouldn't want to replay it and chance it, but I mean, you needed to at least play that matchup with your O-line versus the D-line and like to a standstill. I felt like Houston's D-line probably won that matchup overall, but you were fortunate enough to get a win, and that's all that matters. But I don't want to keep doing that because at some point, your boys in the trenches are going to have to do their part. And we're talking D-line here versus their really solid offensive line, and we can obviously have that same conversation on the other side too. But
if we're seeing 4 sacks for an edge rusher every week, then we're going to be facing 12 first-round picks next year. I mean, you're going to be making a lot of guys a lot of money if that's the case.
That's right. Not going to go well. I mean, you're just playing roulette at that point, and it's not. That's just not winning football. So you got to get that, some of that fixed.
That's exactly right. You may survive it, but not for long.
I think, Cowan, on the flip side, and I may be getting way ahead of myself here, but I think NC State's only got 1 sack on the season.
That's correct. By a defensive back. Also their leader in the interception column.
Right.
What a weird start.
Yeah, limited sample size, obviously. But
sure.
Still,
But a team that collected 33 a season ago, one of those numbers I had to think twice about. Again, in only 12 games, 33 times did they get to the quarterback a season ago. Early on, at least, a weird stat line there with the DB leading their sack column with 1. Going for 2 whenever Texas Tech comes to town this weekend. Want to get back to that conversation up front for the Red Raiders defensively, because clearly being able to battle and dominate at the line of scrimmage, take away that ground game is a great factor into a winning recipe for any football team. We've seen good things from the rush defense so far this season, but am I ready to believe or am I ready to be hurt again? We'll investigate coming up next. But first, want to remind you about our friends at BetOnline, the number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all of the latest odds and ends, not only on college and professional football, but also Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, esports, and more. They're covering all the bases there. Don't pardon that pun. Deal with it. It'll be good for you, just like checking out BetOnline, where the game starts. Got to tell you about our man, Armin Williams, because Armin is saving Red Raider-owned businesses cash in all directions. You got to be more efficient heading into 2023 than Armin Williams with Schooley Mitchell is your man. SaveWithArmin.com is the website, Chris. And as I mentioned before, when you're allowing someone to really become involved like this with something so precious as is someone's business, you want to be able to trust them. And Armin is a guy that clearly fits that bill.
Yeah, and I think the most important part here is that there's no upfront cost. But if Armin specifically doesn't find you savings, then you owe them nothing. I mean, and that's so it's just it's an easy sell, you would think, to a business trying to just find any sort of saved cost anywhere. And Armin's he's trying to help out Red Raiders, and back in town this past weekend in Lubbock for the first time in a long time. He's he was Mr. Texas Tech there for a while, and it was good to have him back in town. But yeah, he's just trying to help out other Red Raiders, and that's the most important thing. But SaveWithArmin.com is where you need to go.
You said he was on the field right after the game?
He was part of the melee down there.
You know what I heard?
Field.
I heard he presented Kirby Hocutt later on with a full analysis of how a field rush could be more efficient. They're already saving them cash. He was actually down there working left and right, just thinking, where can we trim things up a little bit?
I saw this picture.
Stops working.
I saw this picture with his arm around Kirby Hocutt. I did see this. Yes,
they're doing business. They're trying to streamline this operation.
Schooley Mitchell,
you,
Mr.
he's
Hocutt,
on the job constantly. On the job for you. SaveWithArmin.com. And essential business services reduced by, on average, 28% when you get involved. So think about just on average what you could do with that type of extra wiggle room. And like Chris already mentioned, no upfront costs. All starts with a free analysis at SaveWithArmin.com. Always great to be with you on Locked On Texas Tech with Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making it your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts. If you are watching as a guest, welcome, hang around, have some of the hors d'oeuvres. Feel free to use the inside bathroom or the backyard if it's your choice. I don't limit anybody at my house. I'm not a policeman. And consider subscribing, becoming part of the family if you haven't done so, because it's nice to have you around every once in a while. But, Chris, I want somebody to subscribe and really know that they can be comfortable enough to kick their shoes off whenever they're taking in Locked On Texas Tech. 5
days a week.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
And if you show up to our house, I want you to use a ladle in the punch bowl and get you a fancy cup. And, there's probably like a cookie and a napkin next to it, so make sure you dabble there.
This sounds like a tasteful ordeal.
Shortbread cookies in particular. Yes.
You bring out the shortbread, it's high class.
That's right.
In West Texas. And that's the only way that Locked On Texas Tech does it. I said a moment ago, we were touching on North Carolina State, beginning to set our sights now on the Wolfpack and getting ready for the third go round for Joey McGuire and company in 2022. And you and I, Chris, were talking about the trenches. And of course, I said one great way to maybe, apply some pressure, make it easier to apply some pressure on a really gifted quarterback like Devin Leary is for North Carolina State, is to really take the ground game out of the equation. Obviously, that to lean on for an offense is going to keep a defense a little bit more honest and provide some things, through play action potentially down the field that can be some big hitters. So containing a ground game is important. We all know it. Texas Tech mostly done it this year, but should we believe what we've seen so far, or should we be ready to be hurt again? Here's defensive coordinator Tim DeRuyter on what's been going on up front on that side of the ball for the Red Raiders.
I was pleased with how our defensive line played. We let Tune out a couple times. We got to do a better job. And our plan was to try to keep him in the pocket, and we got to do a better job in conversion on play action pass. But overall, I thought the physicality was there up front. We've got some guys that can knock the line back and reset the line of scrimmage, which obviously helps. And I thought we did, for the most part, a pretty good job against the run game. A couple times we didn't fit the edges as well as we should have. But overall, been pleased 2 weeks in that I mentioned last week, I think we've got, two deep in our D line that can really play.
Yeah, there's Leary's the one that makes me the most nervous here from a run game standpoint this weekend. They've got, again, two backs that are just solid. The one main one, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. It's not 6 o'clock on Saturday night yet, so I don't have to learn the pronunciation of it just yet. It's like three names. It's very difficult to try to say. I don't even want to attempt it yet. I'm not to look ahead, but Bijan Robinson is the one that I'd probably be worried about the following week because he's maybe the best back in the country. But it's just funny because that I was talking to Coach DeRuiter on Joey's show last week, and he starts talking about everybody's got these mobile quarterbacks now, and pretty much this is just standard. And he's talking about the premises of defense and how it's all just based on gaps. Everybody's got a responsibility and all that. Well, when you have somebody that can run it, that quarterback is not accounted for. And so it creates separate gaps. And now you've got one person for two gaps. And that's why QB run game in many ways works so well, especially when it's not even called. It's just, okay, I don't have anything. I'm just going to tuck it and go.
Right.
And that's the part that makes me the most nervous here because Leary's a very physical runner. If you go back and look at their last weekend's highlights, I mean, he's one of the touchdown runs. He's carrying a couple of guys into the end zone. So he's a tough short yardage guy as well. But I feel like your group up front has played pretty well. And if you go back and look at the stats, Casey, last year, run defense was not your problem. I mean, you were pretty good against the run. You could make the argument that nobody tried to run it because of how well everybody threw it against you. And I know Texas ran it well. TCU certainly ran it well. That was not a game that I'd want to try to relive in my mind. But I think overall, this defense of this school, this program has gotten much better against the run than in recent years when it used to be just a turnstile. So I think that you've got enough pieces and depth and talent up front that nobody should just be able to run wild on you anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And I got to say, I kind of like the matchup. Leary doesn't worry me as much matchup wise as a runner because of the measurables of some of the dudes that Texas Tech themselves have up front defensively. And if that's the route, I think that the quarterback would like to go within that ground attack and wants to be a more physical runner. I hope that that's a challenge that Texas Tech will welcome and maybe have an advantage within in the open field. But Chris, I would say as well that when we're talking about somebody who has any ability to improvise, we're talking about the onus that puts on a defense to really be disciplined. And I just love the new phrase I heard this week, eye violations. I hope the eye violations are at a minimum because I think clearly you're talking experience for Devin Leary and probably talking about a quarterback who maybe can fool a defender here or there, right?
Yeah, I think as long as – because, Leary's going to take some shots. And I think as long as, you don't bite on, one of those play action fakes, you're going to be in position to make some plays. And ultimately what you're saying is about your guys up front is we know Tyree Wilson needs to play well, but it's guys like Miles Cole and Phillip Bleedy. And because, I feel like what you're going to get from Jalen Hutchings and Tony Bradford, but it's Bleedy and Miles Cole. Those are guys we need to start to kind of see continue with the uptick, or like we start to notice them a bit more in a good way. And, I think Adedire, excuse me. I knew I'd screwed that up. Joseph Adedire is back. He's somebody else that is learning how to play at about 270 and learning how to play very hard. But I think that defensive rotation up front is a bit deeper now with him back. but those are the kind of players that are ultimately going to decide how good your group is, because we saw Tony and Jalen and Tyree Wilson last year, but they didn't necessarily have all these. And Phillip was there too, but I just think he's better this year. But Miles Cole being added, Adedi Ray is certainly there, and so those are the guys that will kind of determine where you're at. But disciplined with your rush lanes was big last week versus Clayton Tune. You kind of don't give him anywhere to go. Be careful about running up the field and just over pursuing, because he, this kid's going to do that to you, just like Tune did a little bit. They're going to step up and you give him a lane to rush in and he's gone. So being disciplined and kind of keeping that pocket and making it, although it's kind of tricky to say, hey, yeah, please throw it against us. Please step up in the pocket and let's make you throw it. But it's hard because you also don't want to let him take off and run either.
Yeah, no question about it. One name you mentioned there, I thought the Portales Prince, Philip Bleedy, I thought he continued to trend in the right direction, given the rise in competition. Still made some plays. I think had a tackle for loss and a half or something like that, maybe a couple. And looked like he was at least making an impact whenever he got the opportunity, like he did in week 1 against Murray State. Of course, there's the hedge we got to throw out. But I liked what we got from him in game 2.
Yeah, and again, I think with guys like that, and Tyree, we're asking the same thing. It's consistency. It's, can you do this week in and week out? Can you make plays that change a game, or to stop a 3rd down or 4th down? I mean, or can you force a turnover, whether it's a strip sack or whether it's getting your hand in the quarterback's face and make him throw it to you a little bit. I mean, those are the kind of plays that a guy like Tyree Wilson especially needs to make. But Phillip just needs to keep being consistent. But I like the measurables, as you mentioned. I mean, you've got finally some depth, and again, big people beat up little people, as Joey will tell you.
That's right. And if Coach DeRuiter is willing to throw out something along the lines of a 2 deep of guys that can play, like he kind of alluded to there, I'm going to take him at his word for now. But, man, they've got a huge challenge, to say the least, coming up in Raleigh Saturday night. Coming up next on Locked On Texas Tech, before we're out of here, want to very quickly take a closer look at one individual who was on the field but not in uniform. That's the offensive coordinator, Zach Kitley. Kind of his first big opportunity on the largest stage yet, at least. Top 25 in-state opponent, OC for the first time back in West Texas. How'd it go? We'll get to some thoughts on Coach Kitley, and also hitting for the first time in the history of the Locked On Podcast Network, I feel quite certain, the Equine grading scale. Coming up next on Locked On Texas Tech. But first, our friends at Flatlands Grain in beautiful Hale Center, Texas, America, standing by like right now, awaiting your call or your visit to flatlandsgrain.com. If you give them a holler, do it at 806-839-2522. Want to be of service to you and your operation this fall. Grain storage needs, wheat, corn, milo, feeding your animals, market analysis, crop analysis. I mean, the experience is there really to cover all those bases. And of course, Chris, it's that time of year that we love so much for so many reasons. Often Red Raider football, chief among them, and certainly the Red Raiders at Flatlands Grain feel the same way. But also just seeing those harvest moons begin to appear on the horizon, right? And it reminds me of some of the days of my utes out laying on top of a cotton module, man. It's just a nice time of year in West Texas, any way you slice it.
Yeah, and these are the folks at Flatland Grains are obviously Red Raiders, man, and the ag community in West Texas is crucial. I mean, hashtag West Texas right there. So, yeah, take care of these folks. By the way, have you ever – so you spent the night on a top of a – what did you say?
I mean –
yeah. Well,
about a night's worth.
Okay.
And I don't know, 15 minutes. What, 20? It was a long read. I can't remember, Chris.
Okay.
You never laid on a cotton module in the middle of harvest time?
I was just asking, man. But yeah, that's where you see the stars. But yeah, go check out the folks at Flatland Grains, man.
I could probably hook you up with one if you and the missus need a night out under the stars. Get you a nice ladder that maybe or maybe not is still featuring all of the original rungs it came with. I don't know what the boys are working with these days, but maybe our friends at Flatlands Grain will have a new shiny ladder if you're looking to get on top of a cotton module at some point in the near future. I'd recommend it for anyone, to be honest.
Okay.
To be honest, I would recommend it for anyone.
Good to know.
Flatlandsgrain.com, also the recommendation. Or give them a call again at 806-839-2522. They're saying Recom Tech at Flatlands Grain. Back for one more round on Locked On Texas Tech. Great to be a part of your day, anywhere, anyhow. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts. Our families do appreciate it. With Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Coming up before we are done for the first time in the history of Locked On Podcast Network. They're throwing a party at HQ over this today. They're stoked. We're hitting the Equine grading scale. And only Locked On Texas Tech, I feel like, really capable to bring you something like that. So hang tight for that in just a moment.
I can't personally wait for that.
You want to skip what I'm going to ask you about right now. I know you voiced your opinions during the break. Yeah. You'd like to just fast forward. But patience, okay. Because I got to touch on this. I feel like it's a moment worth touching on. There was so much buildup coming into the season. Zach Kitley, son of Wes Kitley, been here before. We love him. Great. He loves us. Red Raider through and through. We know that. A guy that has a high profile among play callers nationally, or up and coming play callers nationally, Chris. So a big get for Texas Tech. I'm sure it was a big spot for him Saturday afternoon individually. And I really do just kind of throw Murray State out of the window. So I kind of treat it as his first big opportunity in front of the home crowd. And clearly there were some ups and downs, but he, much like his quarterback at the end of the day, was presiding over something that gathered enough points to win a ball game. I know there was criticism for Coach Kitley among some of the fans. There's going to always be among offensive coordinators because we're all great OCs, although I don't know what the hell defense they're playing on the other side. I just know that play that didn't work stunk. Cross it off the list. All right? That's all it takes, I think. Yeah. What'd you think about his first day in a big moment, because clearly it was that kind of day at the Jones?
Yeah, I think, Casey, they're really young on that side of the ball, and I think we kind of forget that as we watch it. And we're used to certain things. There's no all conference type guy on that side of the ball, or even really close to it, that you would come into the season with. And so I think we have to remember that. And now they're playing with essentially a backup QB. But I think it was a mixed bag. But I thought I had really was kind of surprised that there was a bunch of issues with the job that Zach did. I mean, he's going to take the blame for Donovan's interceptions. He's going to take the blame for maybe not being able to run it as well, or not being as good on third down and all these things. But
some pressure on the quarterback. He mentioned that himself.
Yeah, and
he took a lot of blame, really.
Yeah, and I think he's trying to take one for just a young offensive line and inexperienced offensive line, and trying to do right by his guy, Stephen Hamby. That's kind of part of the job. He's just Zach's a stand-up dude, man. But I just think that you forget how young they are and inexperienced they are. Now, if you can get through, but yet they still put up 500 yards of offense, and they still, scored. Yeah, I mean, they outgained Houston for the most part. Should have had the one touchdown to Jaron Bradley. There was a drop there. I mean, there's just some issues, but he probably felt like some of the plays he could have called differently or at different situations and all that stuff. But I like the 4th and 20 call. I mean, that place, that double seam call seemed to work. I guess I just didn't have some major issue with his job that he did on Saturday. But again, you just have to remember how young they are and all those things. And he's trying to squeeze a bunch out of a lot of inexperience here. And you've had some injuries slightly to Miles Price. Now you're going to deal one with Weston Wright. And so, and Eric Ezukama leaves early and Tyler goes down. So you're just trying to figure this thing out.
I thought it was interesting. I can't really separate the fact that Zach Kitley and Cliff Kingsbury's offensive perspectives are probably very similar because one, I don't want to say was groomed under the other, but that's
exactly right.
Okay. Yeah. I will say that then. I didn't know it was I don't get to be exactly right very often. He was groomed under Cliff Kingsbury. Basically. I always felt like one of the, I guess, pitfalls of Coach Kingsbury's offense, and certainly I defer to his expertise, but it just seems like one of the things that showed up a lot was really bad positioning on third down. You'd wind up in a lot of third and long situations. I mean, that's where I realized Patrick Mahomes was not a human, was because he was in so many 3rd and 12s, 3rd and 13s, and he'd convert it into a first down. I mean, it was insane, but I feel like that essentially – that's kind of on Texas Tech. We made Patrick Mahomes in that way. He wouldn't have had this chance at Alabama in a bunch of 3rd and 3s. Are you kidding me? He needed those 3rd and 13s to get that Hines money, baby. It was all part of the plan. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. I can't separate that from the fact that Coach Kitley's offense featured a little of that, some bad stuff, bad positioning, long yardage to go, long distance on third down on Saturday. And I thought it was interesting also that Joey McGuire mentioned that specifically in referencing Coach Kitley in his portion of the weekly press conference and talking about we got to get our offense in a better position to succeed on third down. So, again, that's just a bunch of my elementary, guesses at what might have been going on the football field, either for Coach Kingsbury or what's happening here with Coach Kitley. But that was something that was kind of a pretty consistent thing, and maybe is it a byproduct of an inconsistent offensive line? I don't know, but I thought it was interesting that Joey McGuire actually touched on that specifically.
Yeah, I think the offensive line plays a part. I think you couldn't run it as well as you wanted to on Saturday, and again, Houston has something to do with that as well.
Sure.
And then you're dealing with a quarterback that hit a few shots, missed a few things, because I think as they went back and looked at it, I think Donovan missed several reads. And there's times where guys are open, but maybe he's feeling pressure that's not there because of some of the pressure that actually was there in other plays. So this is part of the learning experience when you play a younger quarterback, and not that he's big time inexperienced, but this is what was it, his 5th start, I guess, in total versus Houston.
That's wild to think about.
Yeah, and you're running a bit of a different scheme. You shuffled some pieces on the offensive line, and obviously Wright, came out. I didn't think Caleb Rogers played great. So it's just a collection of things, and they'll figure out. I tell you, the one part, and we talked about this maybe earlier in the week, but the one thing that wasn't really prevalent at all, which I think would help you avoid some of these third and longs. And I don't know if Zach necessarily wants to major in it. I just think you're going to have to mix in some of this just to simply protect your offensive line and to keep defenses honest, but you're going to have to mix in some of those quick game plays, some of those wide receiver screens, now screens, whatever you want to call them, just to kind of get yourself 3 or 4 yards and treat it like a running play. If you can't, if your group up front can't move people. But this is all predicated on the running game and being able to do it when you want to, not just when you have to.
No doubt. Okay. All that out of the way now.
Yeah, here we go.
Time for the hard stuff.
Let's get ready. Okay, what are we doing
for the first time in the history of the Locked On Podcast Network, the entire universe possibly, Locked On Texas Tech is taking you to the Equine grading scale.
I like to ride my horse and shoot my gun.
So they didn't shoot the horse after this week. Centennial champion still living. I suppose that meant he was trending in the right direction. Rough opening week for Centennial champion and the Masked Rider heading out to Murray State after a little
better
bit of
in
a
week
fist
2
fight. Better in week 2.
Yes.
That was all after a little bit of a fist fight at Ruidoso Downs a little while back. So it's been an off-season storyline here locally. What's the horse looking like? I saw the horse's entire run. Week 2, Chris, I'm not sure I'd quite qualify it as a run, but it was heading down the field in a consistent type of pace, right? So I feel like that's improvement. I'm giving Centennial champion B- for week 2. What do you think?
Which tells me that you were in the C- or C+ range in week 1.
It was not one of the finer Masked Rider jaunts to open up a contest. I'll say that.
Kind of slow and crooked and kind of not real sure.
It didn't kill itself or the Masked Rider, so I can't fail it. But C territory, or maybe D even. For
I
sure.
would say if this was like a feisty ranking, if we're gonna gauge this particular animal on its feistiness, through the roof. A double plus.
Chip on the shoulder range.
Yeah, but yeah,
that's not what
there
you want,
go.
though. That's not what we're looking for.
That's right. But I would agree. If we're going to go C range in week 1, I would say we're in the B range in week 2 for sure. And I can only imagine what this poor animal is going to get put through when the Longhorns come to town.
Yeah.
Because that place will be 2:30 kick. That place will be insane, is my guess. Because that may be the last time we see the Fighting Beavos.
Not a lot of time to prepare for that, but hopefully Centennial Champions are going to be in the right frame of mind whenever the Longhorns do come to town. I mean, A-plus territory is like just that full out. And I tell you what, the riders got something to do with it as well, because we haven't seen an A-plus rider since Homeboy with the handlebars, reins in the mouth, and double guns up, as should be the requirement. That's my new proposal. That's a plank in my 2024 platform. I promise to bring to you, Texas Tech voters, no-handed masked riders, double guns up all the way down the field. Remember that? It was like outlawed, and I'm like, wait, that should actually be the only requirement, is that you're able to do that. So
viewed as unsafe.
Yeah.
Viewed as unsafe, yes.
I mean, come on. You're riding a horse. The entire thing is unsafe. Being raided is unsafe. That's what the guy is supposed to be doing, right?
I will say that the Centennial Champions entourage is also feisty. First of all, I'm going to give you a personal example here in a second, but in week 1 on the broadcast, I talked to Sam Jackson. He's in charge of said program and all that. Been a long time as part of the Master Rider program and all that stuff. Helps train these horses, helps select them and all that stuff. He's kind of in charge, and he's awesome dude. Okay. So he was the one I talked to on first week. He's like, yeah, a little sketchy, and then last week it was like, man, we're better than week 1. I'm like, okay, so I think he would agree with your improving grade too. Okay, but there's other folks that protect and kind of surround, kind of like the, I only entourage is the only word I know to come up with, or like bodyguards or something. But
Pony Posse.
Pony Posse. There you go. Well, let's go with that. But I'm like kind of trying to get past the players box and around to where I can see. And I mean, I'm not even within 10 or 15 feet of this thing. And these two folks just like put hands on me.
No, they didn't.
And they're pointing like the other way, like, hey, the play may be coming this way. I don't know, but I have my headphones on. I can't hear, but I was just like, I probably reacted very poorly and unprofessionally. And I'm sorry that I did that, but I was like, everybody should just calm down. I wasn't anywhere near the horse. I know there's a game going on and all that stuff, but they were very protective of Centennial Champion. And maybe it's because of the feistiness there. So
did they not know who you were?
It probably doesn't matter. Probably shouldn't care. I was in no way wanting to ruffle Centennial Champion's feathers, nor was I wanting to get hit with some player flying out of bounds or whatever. But anyways, but all is good. No. I apologize for my unprofessionalism, but yeah, I got hands put on me.
I reversed my grade, D- week 2. Pony Posse puts their hands on big handsome Chris Level.
Sam's people wouldn't do that. It was just a misunderstanding. Yeah, misunderstanding.
Until next time, you'll have a chance to redeem yourself, Centennial Champion and Pony Posse. That's tricky.
And it was no fault of Centennial Champion. It was just his people being very protective of him.
Sometimes it's the company we keep, Chris. Yeah. Let's end on that. Something good for all the kids.
They're good people, I'm sure. Yes.
We're all sure, but I can't wait till the next Equine grade scale for the second time ever in the Locked On Podcast Network universe history. All right, we're back around tomorrow for a little Friday edition of Locked On Texas Tech, and that means we're just a few days away from the Red Raiders' next go-round. It's Saturday night from Raleigh, North Carolina, and plenty more to come on the Wolfpack this week. Chris, thanks for your time once again, man. See you on the other side.
Hey, and thanks to Sideline Provisions for the Cactus Polo, man. Guns up. Keep
your cactus out.
I absolutely am, man.
And thank you to another feisty horse of my own this morning for what I got in me. It's not on a T-shirt or bought at a local clothier. Came by it honestly out on the plains of West Texas today. Appreciate that feistiness. Ow! All right. See you guys tomorrow on Locked On Texas Tech. After today's show, make sure Locked On Big 12, your second listen with Josh Neighbors as he's swinging it around the league for coverage top to bottom, inside and out. We're back at it with the Red Raiders coming up tomorrow on Locked On Texas Tech.